There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't scream. It waits. It echoes. It sits in the quiet after the last message, in the unread notification that never comes, in the way your body still turns towards someone who has already turned away. And maybe that's the cruelest part of loving an avoidant ex. Not the ending itself, not even the distance. It's the silence that follows. And how that silence makes you question everything. Did they ever love you? Did any of it matter? How can someone hold you so closely one moment, then vanish behind an invisible wall the next? Like the intimacy meant nothing. You replay their voice in your head. The softness, the hesitation, the way they looked at you when they forgot to be guarded. And then you replay the coldness too. The delayed replies, the emotional shutdown, the strange way they could miss you and still not reach for you. It makes no sense to the part of you that loves directly, openly, urgently. Because when you care, you move closer. When you're afraid of losing someone, you hold on tighter. But that is not how an avoidant nervous system works. And this is the brutal truth most people never tell you. The more you chased clarity, the more they felt trapped. The more you tried to fix the distance, the more their body interpreted love as pressure. Not because you were too much, not because your needs were wrong, but because intimacy, for them, does not just awaken desire. It awakens danger. That's the part that shatters people. You thought love would soften them. You thought consistency would prove you were safe. You thought if you explained yourself one more time, if you loved them more carefully, more patiently, more perfectly, they would stop pulling away. But avoidant patterns are not healed by being loved harder. They are activated by being needed too visibly. The very thing that creates security for you can trigger alarm inside them. So when they went distant, it wasn't always indifference. Sometimes it was overwhelm wearing the mask of detachment. Sometimes it was care, twisted by fear so deeply that it came out as withdrawal. Their body learned a long time ago that closeness costs something. Freedom, control, emotional safety. In some part of them, often buried so far down they can barely name it, connection became associated with engulfment, with expectations, with vulnerability they were never taught to survive. That is why they could miss you and still avoid you. Why they could think about you all day and still not text. Why they could feel the ache of losing you and convince themselves they were better off alone. Their amygdala, the brain's threat detector, does not always distinguish between real danger and emotional exposure. To them, intimacy can create a spike in internal stress. Cortisol rises, the nervous system starts bracing, the mind searches for escape. Suddenly, the relationship that once felt exciting begins to feel heavy, demanding, suffocating, even if nothing outwardly changed except the depth of feeling. And when they pull away, dopamine starts doing something cruel. Distance creates relief. Relief gets mistaken for certainty. Their brain rewards the escape, not because leaving is what they truly want, but because space temporarily quiets the stress response. So they tell themselves stories. I need time. I'm not ready. Something feels off. Maybe we're not right for each other. Maybe I've lost feelings. But many avoidants are not reacting to the absence of love. They are reacting to the intensity of it. That doesn't mean you romanticize their behavior. It doesn't mean you excuse what hurt you. Their wound is not your responsibility. Their patterns still wounded you. Their silence still destabilized you. Their mixed signals still made you doubt your reality. And if you keep trying to translate their fear into permission to abandon yourself, you will lose more than the relationship. You will lose your center. Because the hidden trap in loving an avoidant ex is this: you can become addicted to trying to be understood by someone who survives by not understanding themselves too deeply. You start performing emotional surgery on every interaction. You analyze their tone, their pauses, the wording of a message sent at 11:42 p.m. You become loyal to potential instead of reality. You wait for the breakthrough, the confession, the moment they finally say, "I was scared. I cared more than I could show. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to stay." And maybe part of you still longs to hear exactly that. So let's say it for them, even if they never will. They were afraid to tell you that your love affected them more than they let you see. They were afraid to tell you that your presence reached places in them they preferred to keep numb. They were afraid to tell you that being loved by you did not feel simple. It felt exposing. It felt like standing in bright light with no armor. It felt like being seen and needing that more than they wanted to need anything. And that dependence terrified them. They were afraid to tell you that they noticed when you went quiet, that they reread old conversations, that they checked if you viewed their story, that they felt the absence of your energy like a missing limb and still did nothing. Because for an avoidant person, wanting you can feel humiliating. Missing you can feel like weakness. Needing contact can stir up shame. So instead of moving toward the ache, they detach from it. They intellectualize it. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They scroll. They work. They flirt. They numb. They tell themselves it's fine. But night is different. At night, when the world stops demanding performance, the nervous system gets louder. The defenses loosen just enough for the truth to leak in. They remember the version of themselves they were with you. The softer one. The unguarded one. The one who almost stayed. They remember your patience, your scent on a hoodie, the conversation they cut short because it was getting too real, the text they wanted to send but didn't. And underneath all of it is one unbearable feeling: regret, without the emotional tools to repair it. This is why silence is the concept you need to understand. Not passive silence, not wounded silence, not silence used as a trick. Sacred silence. Regulated silence. The kind that does not beg to be interpreted because it is rooted in self-respect. When you stop chasing, you are not punishing them. You are stepping out of the role their pattern assigned you. You are no longer volunteering to be the pursuer, the translator, the emotional first responder every time they panic and disappear. And something shifts when you do that. At first, they may feel relief. That's the part nobody warns you about. When you stop reaching, the avoidant ex often experiences a strange exhale. No immediate pressure. No confrontation. No mirror held up to their inconsistency. The system calms. They tell themselves this is for the best. But then the second wave comes. Because your silence is no longer trying to get a reaction. It becomes reality. And reality hits harder than pursuit ever could. They wake up and notice there is no message waiting. They post something small and meaningless just to see if you're still watching. They wonder if you've finally detached. They remember how available you used to be, how certain your presence once felt, and now they can't measure your emotional location anymore. That uncertainty starts doing to them what their distance did to you. Not because you were playing a game, because the dynamic has changed. When you were always reaching, they never had to confront your absence. You made the emotional bridge for both of you. You kept the pulse going. You kept the possibility alive. But when you stop, they are left alone with the emptiness they created. And avoidant people can tolerate loneliness for a long time when it feels chosen. It is much harder when it feels like loss. So they start thinking, what if you're really gone this time? What if the person who understood me better than anyone finally got tired? What if I misread relief as freedom? What if I didn't lose interest? What if I lost access? That is when obsession can begin, not always outwardly, not always dramatically, but internally, quietly. They check, they think, they compare. They wonder who has your attention now. Dopamine, once attached to distance as relief, begins attaching to your unpredictability. The thing they took for granted becomes the thing their mind circles. Human beings do not only crave what is loving, they crave what is unresolved. And avoidants are especially haunted by emotional doors they closed before fully understanding what was behind them. But listen carefully. This is where people ruin their power. The moment they feel the shift, the moment the avoidant ex reaches out with a breadcrumb, a late-night message, a vague thinking of you, a sudden like, a half-hearted check-in, the old wound inside you lights up. Hope floods the system. Dopamine surges. Your body wants relief. It wants the story to resolve. It wants to believe the silence worked, that now they finally understand. Now they are ready. Now the love can return without the fear. And if you are not careful, you will step right back into the cycle that broke you. Because a moment of missing you is not the same as a capacity to love you well. An avoidant ex can feel your absence deeply and still be emotionally unequipped to sustain closeness. They can come back because the distance hurts and leave again when intimacy returns. They can speak with tenderness and still disappear when the relationship starts requiring consistency, vulnerability, responsibility. Missing you is a feeling. Loving you safely is a skill. Never confuse the two. This is why your real power was never in making them chase. That is too small, too temporary, too dependent on their reactions. Your real power is in becoming someone who no longer needs abandonment to turn into self-respect. Someone who stops measuring their worth by how emotionally available a wounded person can be. Someone who can look at chemistry, longing, history, and still ask the only question that matters. Does this connection honor my nervous system or keep it in survival? Because your body knows. It always knew. It knew in the pauses that felt too long, in the affection followed by withdrawal, in the intimacy that never quite settled into safety, in the way you kept trying to stay calm while your stomach tightened around uncertainty. That wasn't just heartbreak. That was dysregulation. That was your system trying to build a home inside a moving target. And maybe you called it love because that is what pain does when it stays long enough. It changes names. It becomes devotion, loyalty, patience, understanding. But some of what you were feeling was the desperate hope that if you could just love them correctly, they would finally stop leaving. That is not romance. That is a wound negotiating with itself. The deepest shift happens when you stop asking, how do I make them feel what I feel? And start asking, why was I willing to shrink my own truth just to keep someone from running? That question changes everything. Because now the story is not just about their avoidance, it is about your awakening. You begin to see that your softness was never the problem. Your desire for depth was never too much. Your need for reassurance was not weakness. The tragedy was not that you loved deeply. The tragedy was that you kept offering deep love to someone who only knew how to receive it in fragments. and fragments can be intoxicating, but they cannot nourish you. So if they are afraid to tell you anything, it may be this: you mattered more than they could manage. You touched them more than they could integrate. You made them feel more than they knew how to regulate. And instead of rising to meet that reality, they retreated from it. Not because you were unworthy of love, but because love exposed the places in them that were still at war. That is sad, but it is not your sentence. You do not have to spend another season becoming easier to leave. You do not have to stay emotionally fluent for someone committed to emotional avoidance. You do not have to keep translating silence into hidden love just because part of it might be true. Sometimes they did care. Sometimes they were overwhelmed. Sometimes the distance really was fear. And still, you deserve more than someone who feels deeply in private and withholds publicly. Let that land. You deserve a love that does not require detective work. A love that does not punish you for getting close. A love that does not make your nervous system beg your mind to stop hoping. A love where silence is peace, not confusion. So if they come back, do not meet them with the old version of you, the one who was starving for signs, grateful for crumbs, willing to call inconsistency progress. Meet them, if you meet them at all, as someone who has finally learned the difference between being wanted in moments and being chosen in reality. And if they never come back, let that be information, not devastation. Let it reveal what they were capable of, not what you were worth.
Their inability to hold intimacy is not proof that you were hard to love. It is proof that some people will encounter something real and still not know how to keep their hands open. Your healing begins the moment you stop chasing the confession they may never give and start becoming the closure they could never provide. You were not too intense. You were not too emotional. You were not too loving. You were simply asking the wrong person to meet you in the right place. Now the power returns. Not the power of revenge, not the power of being finally chosen. The power of no longer abandoning yourself in the hope that someone else will stop abandoning you. That is the shift. That is the rebirth. That is the moment your heart stops waiting at a locked door and starts building a life that does not need to be let in. And when that happens, something almost sacred takes place. Their silence no longer defines your value. Their confusion no longer becomes your identity. Their fear no longer gets to script your future. You become unreachable in the most beautiful way, not because you are cold, not because you are closed, but because you are no longer available for love that arrives only when it is losing access to you. You become steady, clear, whole. And from that place, whether they miss you or not becomes smaller. Whether they obsess or return becomes secondary. Because the real story was never about getting inside their guarded heart. It was about coming back to your own. So let them be afraid to tell you the truth. You are no longer afraid to live without it.